Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel and episode 31, part 2 of the Jimi Hendrix story, like you've never heard it before. In this episode, we conclude the deep dive into February of 1969, day by day, and in detail, including the iconic Royal Albert Hall performances. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances, and stunning photographs from the period. Gradually, people got to know where we were living, mainly because Jimmy would hand out the address to anyone who asked. It became impossible to dam the steady stream of visitors who trekked up the stairs whenever the main entrance was left open and rang the doorbell every time there was a break in Jimmy's music. Many of them would want to sell him stuff, like ridiculously overpriced jewelry, which he would buy just to make them happy. The next problem was the telephone, which never stopped ringing. I had 2 phones installed, one with a number which we gave out to people, and one which we kept private, and then I would take the general phone off the hook. But Jimmy started giving the other number to people, just in case they couldn't get through on the first line, which completely defeated the object, Kathy Etchingham. Wednesday, the 19th of February. In London, at Olympic Sound Studios, Jimmy attends a recording session by Glass Menagerie, whose first single was being produced by Chas Chandler, while Kathy Etchingham recalled, "One day, GOLDSTEIN wanted to film Jimmy opening the boot of a car and being surprised at finding the cameraman inside. They asked me to get him to do it without letting him know why. I tried, but it was impossible. 'Jimmy,' I said, playing along as best I could, 'help me get some things out of the boot of a car downstairs, will you?' 'What car?' he wanted to know. 'Just a car.' Jimmy smelt a rat. 'What things do you want out of it? Whose car is it? What are you doing with things in someone's car?' He wasn't fooled at all. Nothing I could say would persuade him to go downstairs, so after about 20 minutes, someone had to let the cameraman out because he was having a fit of claustrophobia. Friday, the 21st of February, sees Jimi Hendrix voted Instrumentalist of the World by the Dutch music magazine Hit Week. Saturday, the 22nd of February, Olympic Studios, London, and recording work on various numbers including Go My Own Way, Hound Dog Blues, Message to Love, Valleys of Neptune, and Gypsy Blood. And Sunday, the 23rd of February, at the London Speakeasy, Jimmy jams with Dave Mason and Jim Capaldi. Monday, the 24th of February, and the afternoon is spent rehearsing for the Experience's second Royal Albert Hall performance. Songs officially recorded: Hey Joe, 3 versions of Hound Dog, Voodoo Child, Slight Return, and Getting My Heart Back Together Again. According to Noel Redding, everything was chaos though. Chas Chandler finally came down to try and help sort it out. Prior to the concert, while in the dressing room, Mitch Mitchell is interviewed by Valerie Mabs for Record Mirror, published the 8th of March 1969, titled, "Mitch, Different Lineups Are Like Different Women." Hendrix researcher and author Cesar GLEBEEK, who was in attendance, recalled, "Shortly after 12 o'clock, I telephoned Jane Simmons, who ran the official Jimi Hendrix fan club of Great Britain, between May 1967 to May 1969. Calling from my hotel room in London, I asked her, 'Any news?' Jane replied, 'Jimmy and the boys are scheduled to start rehearsing from about 1 o'clock at the Royal Albert Hall.' 'Wow, you think it would perhaps be possible for us to attend the rehearsals?' Jane, 'I don't think you'll have any trouble getting inside. I won't be able to make it there myself, so I will probably see you at the show later on tonight.' I immediately called VALKOFF's hotel room with the splendid news. We quickly grabbed our cameras and rushed to the nearest underground station. When we arrived at the Royal Albert Hall, we could hear Jimmy and company were already on stage. We then walked around the Royal Albert Hall where we found a door wide open. Bingo! Without hesitation, but with much faster heartbeats, I can assure you, we dashed into the venue. About 5 minutes later, we entered the main hall. Not a soul stopped us or asked what we were doing there. Apart from the first song that was rehearsed, Hey Joe, we watched the entire Experience rehearsals and all the tedious hoopla of the GOLDSTEIN film crew, who were there to test things out in preparation for the filming of the evening show. Later, at the Royal Albert Hall, the Jimi Hendrix Experience performs before a sold-out audience of 5,000 fans, with support acts Van der Graaf Generator and Fat Mattress, with Mike Hug of the Manfred Mann Group guesting on piano. The performance is officially filmed in 16mm by GOLDSTEIN. Concert setlist: STONEFREE, Getting My Heart Back Together, I Don't Live Today, Red House, Foxy Lady, Sunshine of Your Love, Bleeding Heart, Fire, Little Wing, Voodoo Child, Slight Return, Room Full of Mirrors, Purple Haze, Wild Thing, and the Smashing of Amps. The concert, which started at 8 p.m., saw the Experience performing from 8:55 to 10:40 p.m. Mitch Mitchell had this comment. Noel was getting more involved with his own band, Fat Mattress. He had insisted they open for us. I always thought this was strange, him doing that, and Jimmy resented it. Fat Mattress were just okay, but essentially a pretty lightweight band. Hendrix used to call them Thin Pillow. Incredible as it may seem, after all of Noel's hustling for Fat Mattress, they bounced him out a short time later. Gratitude. Eh? According to Chas Chandler, Hendrix captivated fans with his stunning guitar work, enchanting the crowd at every beat and nearly inciting a riot when he threatened to end the show early. Quote, "The crowd got absolutely livid and yelled for over 5 minutes. Some people began to leave as it seemed the band wouldn't return. But they did come back and were absolutely... Well, there are no words. People were dancing non-stop, and Jimmy electrified the audience with his aura, playing tracks like Purple Haze and Wild Thing. He played the guitar with his teeth and then tossed it on the ground." Unquote. Valerie Mabs writing in Record Mirror, the 8th of March, 1969, Jimmy's opening numbers were harsh and brutal, but he mellowed and progressed into some blues-slanted tunes during his over 60-minute appearance. There were the usual chug-chug and driving guitar numbers, and the ever-popular Foxy Lady. It seems no audience would consider a Hendrix set complete without this number. Audiences go wild, and on this occasion, one brave chap danced high up over the stage to show his appreciation, and an attendant who removed him was heartily booed. While Jane Simmons in the official Jimi Hendrix Fan Club of Great Britain newsletter, April the May 1969, wrote, "At the end of the show, Jimmy said that he was sorry, but he had to go and thanked everyone for coming once again and left the stage. The crowd then went absolutely berserk and shouted for more for about 4-5 minutes. Some people started to leave as it didn't look as though they were coming back, but they did, and then they went absolutely... Well, there is no word for it. People were dancing in the aisles, Jimmy went mad with the atmosphere, and they did Purple Haze and Wild Thing. He played with his teeth and then on the floor. Then he started charging his amplifier with his 1967 Sunburst Fender Stratocaster guitar. Like a Spanish bullfighter, poor old Jerry R. Rhodey was hanging onto the amps for dear life. He was the bull, methinks. Finally, when it was smashed, he threw it out to the audience and settled a feud between two boys fighting over his plectrum in the audience. Mitch threw his drumsticks to the audience too, and just about managed to get off the stage before it was besieged by fans, police, bouncers, floor managers, and practically the entire audience. A great night was had by all. Chris Needs, reporter, wrote in Guitar Heroes No. 3, January 1987, "This was the only time I ever saw Hendrix. Much of the showmanship had been dropped in favor of long, bluesy jams, delivered with bowed concentration. It was the best show I'll ever see. At times it seemed if the roof of the old building would roar off into the starry night. Hendrix's blues were awesome. His high, keening screams wrenched the heart from its socket. The growling violence of Voodoo Child, Slight Return, was like being in the electric chair. His feedback created sounds which have never been repeated." Gary Hill, fan and audience member, had this recollection. "Being a skinny 15-year-old freak, no one called themselves a hippie back then, and often as not mistaken for a girl, I found myself being lifted along with several genuine girls onto the side of the stage as the crush at the front became worse. Shortly after this, Jimmy went into a new number called Room Full of Mirrors, and Dave Mason, Chris Wood, plus Rocky joined him. An amazing, even definitive performance, a million times better than the gimmicky version on Rainbow Bridge. I also remember the hum of the equipment between songs, Jimmy's frequent Cheshire Cat grins, and the finale of charging his speakers with great gusto. The next day my ears still rang to such an extent that I failed to respond when my name was called at morning class registration. My deafness mistaken for insolence, I received a detention." And this account from another fan and audience member. Can't remember too much about getting to our seats, but there was quite a lot of whinging around us while they were testing the magnesium spot lamps. I'm sure a lot of fans would have preferred the gig to have been in the dark. It didn't bother me, however. I enjoyed Van der Graaf Generator, who opened the show, especially listening to Dave Jackson playing the saxophone through a wah-wah pedal. They got a fairly good reception, but people were beginning to get a bit restless by the time Fat Mattress did their set. Noel's guitar playing was not particularly inspiring, and generally speaking, I think the audience were ready to move on. By the time it was the turn of the Experience, there was a complete buzz about the place, and a few boos when all the filming spotlights went on full blast. Shouts of, "Turn them off," come to mind. My memories of Jimmy's entrance are a bit sketchy, but a lot of my brother's friends were giggling at his stage outfit. They soon shut up when he started playing. It was the one and only time that I saw Hendrix, so I didn't know what to expect. I had anticipated that the set list would include many tracks from Electric Ladyland, but this was never going to happen. From my point of view, there seemed to be more obscure blues numbers, as opposed to rock, early on in the concert. For instance, very few people in the audience had heard "Getting My Heart Back Together Again" before, and I'm pretty sure "Bleeding Heart" was brand new on his repertoire. By about halfway through the concert, people were shouting out requests after each number, mainly for Wild Thing, presumably, because that was his usual song for the guitar-wrecking finale. For me, seeing Jimmy's playing technique for the first time was fascinating, and the volume from his 6 Marshall cabinets was mind-blowing but crystal clear. He switched between his white Strat and the black Strat a few times. I think the white Strat had the edge at this gig. A lot of the time he was just playing the fretboard with his right hand, knocking and tapping the stock with his left, and using his mastery of feedback to do the rest. The spellbound audience had a great time. There was one lunatic in pink or purple flares who decided to scale the woodwork of the Albert Hall organ and started gyrating on the keyboard cover. He got pulled down by security, but I think he got up there again before getting arrested. This will all come out in the film, I'm sure. On another occasion, there was a small girl dressed exactly like Jimmy who ran out to him on stage twice in between numbers. How bizarre. Even though Hendrix announced them, nobody really knew who Rocky Dzidzo knew. Chris Wood and Dave Mason were at the time for "Room Full of Mirrors." It could have been anybody up there. There was so much going on around the stage in between Voodoo Child and Room Full of Mirrors, we couldn't tell who was who. Noel Redding was pushed way to the back to let Dave Mason fit in. Mitch was brilliant during Room Full of Mirrors, forcing the audience to clap in time, after they lost the plot by kicking the bass drum with a "You will clap in time, you morons" rhythm. Then the encore, where I'm sure the audience thought Jimmy was playing a prized guitar, but as later revealed, it was a really manky old spare part Strat, which screeched away out of tune during Purple Haze and Wild Thing. Who cares? The mini riot ensued, and it was a bit of a shock to me as a 15-year-old kid when the police went on stage at the end. I forgot to mention that during the Smashing Up encore, Jimmy made several charges with the manky Strat at one particular Marshall cabinet, until he successfully gored it. Each time there were 2 roadies acting as buffers on the other side to stop it toppling over. According to Hendrix author Ben VALKOFF, Jimmy entered the stage dressed in a waistcoat with sparkling coloured spangles at the back, green trousers, white boots, and a red-yellow bandana tied around his head. In chronological order, they played "STONEFREE, I Don't Live Today," "Red House," "Foxy Lady," "Sunshine of Your Love," "Fire," "Little Wing," and "Voodoo Child, Slight Return." Among these old numbers, 4 brand new ones were played. 3 titles we could detect, namely "I'm Gonna Leave This Town," "People, People," and "Room Full of Mirrors." The show was interrupted twice by 2 toddlers, who ran onto the stage and shook hands with Jimmy under thunderous applause. After the Jimi Hendrix Experience had played their last number, "Room Full of Mirrors," and had left for the dressing rooms, the crowd started to shout, "More!" And an encore was given. And what an encore it was. An encore of 15 minutes during which Purple Haze and Wild Thing were played. A bongo player joined, and a flutist who nearly blew his lungs out in his efforts to be heard above the noise of Jimmy, etc. At the end of Wild Thing, something happened which Jimmy had not done for a long time. He turned around and stormed at one of his Marshall speaker cabinets. By the 3rd time he drove his guitar inside until a large hole appeared in the canvas, then took hold of the neck of the guitar and started to hit the amplifier, which caused an enormous noise. The only thing that remained of the guitar was the neck, which he threw into the audience. Mitch surely didn't want to stay behind, because his drumsticks also went into the crowd. Some tried to climb onto the stage, but these people were knocked off in an expert way by the roadies. It really became quiet when a few of the London bobbies came on stage. In total, Jimmy, Noel and Mitch played 1 3/4 of an hour. Again, it was great. Dave Mason, guitarist with Mason, Capaldi, Wood and Frog, had this to say: We jammed during Room Full of Mirrors. It was fun. I made no pretense of keeping up. I just played rhythm. He goes on to say that, quote, Jimmy and I talked about joining the group. When I left Traffic, I was going to join the group on bass, but that got kind of squashed by Chaz Chandler and Michael Jeffrey. Whoa, I wouldn't have bought a used car from Jeffrey, I can tell you that. I was going to join the band and all of a sudden it was just all fucking different. Unquote. Interestingly, Jimmy was appointed godfather to Dave Mason's son True from his first marriage. According to an unknown reporter, in a piece that appeared in Melody Maker, the 1st of March 1969, thousands of fans cheered on Jimi Hendrix at his Albert Hall concert, but only a few hundred could watch him in his best environment, an after-hours jam session. As soon as his show was over, he drove to London's Speakeasy Club to jam. Attentive faces gathered around, but there was no wild applause, and some knowledgeable ears related they had some difficulty getting together, although Jimmy was playing well. The Gold and Goldstein film, the holy grail of Jimi Hendrix lost films, documenting the final UK performance. The monumental concert was immortalized on film, and 5 decades later, in October 2019, an enhanced screening was showcased at the Royal Albert Hall. Bearing the name, The Jimi Hendrix Experience, the Royal Albert Hall, this iconic concert footage is dubbed as the Holy Grail of Lost Films by the official Jimi Hendrix website. The event's promotional content claims, this film remains unreleased on any medium and hasn't seen commercial screening globally. Over the last 50 years, its absence has sparked discussions, legal battles, and immense curiosity. The refined film, with a soundtrack revamped by Jimi Hendrix's sound engineer Eddie Kramer, vividly illustrates the epical show by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, along with behind-the-scenes moments and sequences from the uproarious London event aftermath. Barring some unauthorized bootlegs and grainy YouTube glimpses, a tantalizingly brief, 1-minute 14-second trailer is all that fans can view of this rejuvenated Jimi Hendrix film. Noel Redding said, after a personal screening, Gold and Goldstein spent endless hundreds of thousands fighting lawyer Leo Branton's stance, who, acting on behalf of the Hendrix estate, claimed that they had no right to release their Albert Hall film. But in relation to the film, Noel noted, the quality is absolutely amazing. The colors are brilliant. The sound is fantastic. It's what I'd imagine it was like watching a Jimi Hendrix Experience gig from the front row. While Kathy Etchingham remembered, Gold and Goldstein filmed the 2 Albert Hall gigs, which Jimmy wasn't too happy about, because it meant having the lights up in the auditorium, which he thought spoilt the atmosphere. The continuity of the film is very muddled. I fractured my ankle coming home late one night, stepping awkwardly off the front doorstep as Jimmy fuddled with the key. As a result, I'm in a plaster cast and in crutches in some shots and not in others, and our clothes keep changing from shot to shot. It is all very amateurish by today's standards, but it is evidently still a valuable document because of its rarity value. The Jimi Hendrix Experience at the Royal Albert Hall, London Revisited. KRIS Welch, noted music journalist and author, explains, clearly this wasn't the same show I had seen. It was vastly better, more exciting, and reached a climax that was frankly staggering. In fact, it was so good, I had to revise my conclusions about the experience long embedded in rock consciousness. I'd happily recalled the impact early club appearances by the newly arrived guitar hero from America had on London's music scene. We had all delighted in the hit singles, the studio albums, and the first full-on concerts at the Seville Theatre and beyond. But there were also memories of disappointing outdoor festival gigs, at Woburn and the Isle of Wight when Jimmy seemed lost and the band disjointed. This wonderful film swept away all of those negative thoughts. No matter how many times I'd seen the experience in the past, this was like seeing them at their absolute best, for the very first time. So the Royal Albert Hall concert I reviewed was held on February 18th, 1969, and not the one on February 24th. It hadn't been filmed because the lighting in the hall wasn't sufficiently bright. On that occasion, the experience was supported by a post-traffic group billed as Mason, Capaldi, Wood and Frog plus Soft Machine. The show was okay, if not wonderful. Back to the Future. Now we could see the real Jimi Hendrix close-up in action, a masterful, pioneering, innovative guitarist, a singer steeped in the great tradition of American blues and folk music, and a real human being, a personality exuding the ultimate in cool, humor, passion and intensity. The film, produced by Jerry Goldstein and withheld from public view for so long due to the machinations of the music biz, is not only a fitting tribute to Jimi's memory, it is also a time machine that brings back the atmosphere of the 60s, its people, fashions and attitudes. How the audience at the screening jeered at the mustachioed commissionaire, seen trying restrain over enthusiastic hippies. How wonderful to see the roadies, technicians, managers, girlfriends and all the beautiful people of the flower power scene swirling around Jimi, Mitch and Noel like satellites backstage at sound checks, driving in limos, jamming in his Mayfair flat and partying at famed night spot, the Speakeasy. Of course, it was the music we came to experience and the sheer, riveting power exercised by Jimi with that fingertip control of his trusty Fender guitar was mesmerizing. There were moments when he drifted away on secretive spiritual journeys. Then came the blasting back down to earth, crash landing into total funk grind, all the while unleashing familiar riffs and teasing melodies. STONEFREE set us free from the outset. It wandered through different grooves, but was always brought under control by the drummer and bass player, loyally responding to Jimi's changing musical moods. A nod here, a glare there was no mistaking his unspoken directions. And when Jimi turned them loose, it was Mitch Mitchell who shone with a tumultuous drum solo that drew cheers from an audience not even at a live concert, but straining their necks to gaze up at the pulsating screen. Mitch was always a highly regarded drummer, even from his R&B days with Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames. His freewheeling style blossomed with the experience, but could be erratic at times. Not so on the night in question, as the tiny figure launched into an astonishing assault on his double bass drum Ludwig kit. He disappeared in a mass of flying hair and shining cymbals. All we could see were the sticks flailing. On that night he outdrummed them all, Baker and Bonham included. He certainly deserved that Rolls Royce we saw him being chauffeured around in later in the movie. Noel Redding too stayed on the ball throughout. While never the focus of extensive camera attention, given that all eyes were on Jimi, his bass playing gave sturdy support for Hendrix, and Noel formed a perfect teammate for Mitch in the rhythm section. As the show progressed, Jimi embarked on a series of hypnotic performances playing such songs as Lover Man, I Don't Live Today and one of my favorites, the ultimate blues anthem Red House. We leapt from our seats for Foxy Lady, Fire, Little Wing and Voodoo Child Slight Return, and sprawled exhausted for Purple Haze, The Wonderful Wild Thing, and Jimi's Tilt at the Star-Spangled Banner. An anthem the former paratrooper must have heard played many a time during his 101st Airborne days. Thank you very much, was all Jimi could say to his audience after such a physically exhausting and emotionally draining performance that saw him kicking over Marshall amps and smashing a guitar to smithereens, and finally hurling the broken neck out into the once restrained and now hysterical audience. No wonder he had tears in his eyes as the artist sat later, alone for once, in the dressing room. Late Tuesday, the 25th of February, in London at Chas Chandler's house. Noel Redding recalled, "There is a business meeting called, and we are all there, Jimi, Mitch, Michael, Chas and myself, and we talked for hours. The conclusion written in my diary is, we sacked Jeffrey. We had all decided we'd prefer to be with Chas if they were splitting up partnership. None of us trusted Michael. I don't know why we trusted Chas. Jeffrey just said, well, that's okay. I don't remember that he protested at all. Perhaps the whole scene had been engineered. Anyway, things didn't change much at all afterwards. We had been trying to get away from Michael for years now, and somehow he was always there." Wednesday, the 26th of February. Monica DANNEMANN arrives in London by car from Germany and checks into a hotel near Marble Arch. At Olympic Sound Studios, the band works on recordings for Untitled Outtake, 12 Bars Jam with Horns, and Gypsy Blood. While later, Monica DANNEMANN visits the Speakeasy Club. Mitch and Noel arrive after midnight, while Jimi arrives around 2 a.m. After eating, Jimi and Monica leave the club and drive to an all-night coffee bar, before Monica drops Jimi off at his flat on 23 Brook Street, according to Monica DANNEMANN. "Jimi wanted to move in with me, but I felt that things were moving too fast, and he understood. When we were not together, he stayed at the group's flat in Brook Street." Thursday, the 27th of February. During the day, the group undertakes interviews with Ray Coleman of Disc and Music Echo, Alan Smith of New Musical Express, and Bob DAWBARN for Melody Maker. Noel Redding noted in his diary, "Met bloke from Les Perron's office. Did interview. Hendrix was rude to everyone." Later, Jimi sees Dutch singer Shirley Martin at the Bag O' Nails, then meets up with Monica DANNEMANN to hang out at the Speakeasy Club, eventually retiring to Monica's hotel room, where Jimi spends the night. Bob DAWBARN recalled, "A lifelike rubber rat stared at the TV in Jimi Hendrix's top-floor flat, just off London's Bond Street. A stuffed panda sat on the floor wearing a green hat, and what seemed to be a teddy bear in the last stages of malnutrition hung from a nail in the wall. Over the bed, a Persian rug served as a canopy, giving the effect of a four-poster. A large Roland Kirk-type gong stood near the bed, and most available surfaces were covered with guitars, assorted electronic equipment, transistor radios, a cine projector, and a vase full of feathers. The general effect was as colourful as Jimi himself. As we sipped tea, I wondered if he enjoyed the non-musical side of his business, the interviews, the public face, and the efforts to be nice to people who might be of help, however nauseous they might be." "It can be a hang-up," admitted Jimi, using his favourite expression of distaste. "I like to leave all that to the glamour people as far as possible, the Engelberts and Tom Joneses. They are the ones who sing beautifully enough to have their voices in TV commercials. Me, I'm just trying to get music together. I don't like having to dress up and go to social parties much, but you just have to do it." Mitch and Noel were quick in wanting to come home from the States. There is all this violent thing in the States right now. It's really a clash between the new and the old. They make black and white fight against each other, so they can take over at each end. If they can get the Black Panthers fighting the hippies who are the young whites, then we will all be right back where we started off 20 years ago. This, it seems to me, is what they are trying to do. It bothers me that some black people now can't get into our music right away, because they are so hung up about other things. I suppose in the end they will send people like me to the North Dakota concentration camps. That seems to be what a lot of Americans are working for. All the new things we have just don't match up to old laws and old ways of thinking. This is what it is all about, new ideas and old laws." "How does Jimi feel about money?" "It's great stuff if you use it wisely," he laughed. "Everybody needs it and you can't give all your money away. But when you have enough for your own needs, then you can go back on the road and try to do a little preaching." The trouble with money, like drugs, is that most people let it rule them, instead of using it as a step to something else. And in this business, there are so many artificial people. I can always tell the artificial people from the real music people, the ones who care about the music and what they are doing. The thing is, you have to be positive. You have to keep going until you have all the negatives out of your system. It's funny the way most people love the dead. Once you are dead, you are made for life. You have to die before they think you are worth anything.